This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So let me answer the title question right away. For me, astrophotography is an art form, but something that I think confuses people is even though photography is right there in the name, astrophotography is really a separate art form from photography. So let me explain. Regular photography has a lot to do with manipulating light, right? Either through direct means like actually changing the direction or the intensity of artificial lights, or indirect means like the time of day or angle at which you capture an outdoor scene. With deep sky astrophotography, we don't have that kind of control over the light. We don't get to work with shadow and angle. Everything is in a sense flat to us. And I've heard some people claim that this constraint, this inability to manipulate the angle or intensity of the light in our images makes astrophotography boring, or it makes it not as artistic, akin to stamp collecting. And I just totally disagree with all of that. Constraints are natural to any artistic practice. And many artists will tell you that putting constraints on their work, whether it's the medium they use or anything, is actually what helps them be creative and make creative breakthroughs. So I fully acknowledge as deep sky astrophotographers, we're working with a very different set of constraints than regular photographers. But to me, that just makes it a different art form in a sense, or at least a different kind of photography than you can expect if you're coming from the regular photography world. But there are some things that I think are fundamentals in any kind of 2D visual art, and I'm planning to make hopefully many videos on these fundamentals and how they apply specifically to deep sky astrophotography. And the fundamental that I want to address in this video is composition. This is, I think, is sort of the granddaddy of everything. So to sum it up in one sentence, composition is what you include inside the frame of your picture and how the objects within that frame are arranged. And we have three controls over composition when capturing an astrophoto. One, field of view, which is determined by your sensor size and your focal length. Two, pointing, which, just as it sounds, is where your telescope or your camera lens is pointed in the night sky, where you center your field of view. And then three, rotation angle, how you rotate the camera relative to the sky. But with just those three controls, there are actually millions and millions of ways you could compose any astrophoto. And I'll just add here that there are actually at least two more controls we have. Mosaics, which are a little advanced, but it means expanding your field of view by stitching panels together. And cropping, which is, of course, very useful. It means changing your composition in processing the photo by cutting parts off. Those are two things I won't really be covering in this video, but maybe I will in future videos. But just in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover mosaics or cropping here, but I wanted to mention them just to be complete of the things that could change your composition. And I think composition in astrophotography is something that appears to be simple compared to all the other things that we need to learn, all these technical things. But it's really not simple. There's a whole world to it. And for me, it's the thing that I consider the most when planning an astrophotograph, and something that I could really talk about for a long time because I find it very interesting. And it's something that I think many astrophotographers should probably be spending more time on if they are interested in this more creative side of astrophotography, making artistic works from the data they collect. To get on with it, here's my plan for the rest of this video. First, I have just a few quick things to say about equipment when it comes to composition. Equipment's not particularly important, but there's just a couple things to mention. I'll then demonstrate visualization tools, how to properly plan a composition when we can't actually see the objects we're capturing, definitely not with our eyes and not in live view either most of the time. And then I'll show how I put that plan into action. And I'll use the example of my latest astrophotograph of Wolf's Cave in Cepheus that I'm releasing concurrently with this video, and I'll put a link in the description. And then in explaining my execution for the Wolf's Cave image, I'll talk about many concepts in composition that I think are important to consider when planning and thinking about composition, things like balance, flow, leading lines, when to center objects, when to make them off center, breathing room, all these kinds of interesting things. So first up, what equipment is needed to get creative with framing? I'd say any equipment from untracked, just a camera on a tripod, to high-end telescope systems can work. The one thing that is missing in some systems that I highly suggest figuring out is the ability to rotate your camera. With many, but not all telescopes, the focuser might include a manual rotator. And with one of these, a manual rotator, all you need to do is loosen the knob and it gives you control over the rotation angle of the camera. If your telescope focuser does not include that, there are third-party solutions you may be able to buy. Again, try searching for camera angle adjuster to find those. And then if you have a higher budget and you want to go sort of high-end, you can get a motorized rotator for your telescope. For my system down at Starfront Observatories that I control remotely, I have a Pegasus rotator, a Falcon V2 on it, because with a remote system, a motorized rotator is the only practical way to have control over your rotation angle. And as you'll see in this video, for me, rotation is critical for planning creative compositions. Okay, so that's all I'll say about gear. The next thing to consider is, how do you compose a scene when you know that most of it will not be visible until after you stack? And the key here is using visualization tools using survey data. And the one I'll show in this video is free and it's available at telescopius.com. It's their telescope simulator. But there are other options, including Stellarium, Nina, Blackwater Skies Imaging Toolbox, astronomy.tools, and there's many more. And all of these tools allow you to do this kind of visualization with survey data. The reason I'm picking Telescopius here is because it has some nice control over the brightness and contrast when looking at the survey imagery. And this is going to help us with composition, especially when going after dim features like dust nebula or very dim emission nebulae. And Telescopius is still in active development by Sebastian Garcia, and he just released a big update to the object database fairly recently in this year, which I know because I support the Telescopius project on Patreon. So let's check out planning a composition with Telescopius. Okay, here I am at telescopius.com. The first step, if you don't already have an account, would be to make a free account. Once you've made an account, you can go to your profile and start adding your equipment. And so at minimum, what you would want to add for framing purposes is your camera and your telescope. So the telescope that I am using in this example is my Askar FRA 500, which is right here. I'll just show you how I set that up. You can see that it does give you an option to have a range of focal lengths, like if you were using a camera lens. In this case, since I have my Askar set up with the reducer permanently installed down at Starfront, I just gave it one focal length, 350. Okay, then we can search for an object that we're going to plan a composition around. I'm planning this composition around it's sometimes called Wolf's Cave, named after Max Wolf, but the central object is VDB 152. And for anyone that doesn't know, VDBs are Vandenberg objects, which are reflection nebulae. And this one is sometimes called the Penguin. When you are brought to a page about the object, it has some information about when in the year it's most visible from your location. You can also check this sort of daily thing about how high it will be in your local sky. So you can see right now in November, Cepheus is highest right at nightfall, and then is setting through the first part of the night, and by midnight it's getting pretty low. All right, but the thing that we're concerned with for this video is down here, the telescope simulator. And it will use whatever last settings you had in here. So you can see my last settings, I had it at a focal length of 490, and you can just enter that in manually if you want, but you also have the option of using your equipment that you would save to your profile. So I'm just going to click on my Ascar FRA 500 there, and then here I will click on my 2600 mm. And after you've set your telescope and your camera, the next thing I actually want to show you is that if you don't want if you want a slightly bigger view and you don't want all this information around the telescope simulator, you can actually make the telescope simulator full screen right down here. It's the final button down here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And for planning and composition purposes, I think this is a must because it really lets you see the survey data a lot better. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is actually change the properties of the survey data for this object, because this object and this scene are a very, very dim scene. So you can see here, you can just barely see that there is the object right there in the center, but everything else is basically hidden from us with the default settings. So something that I like in Telescopius is you can click here on the survey button and it gives you these options to control the survey settings. So what I usually do is I brighten quite a bit, maybe sometimes all the way to maximum. In this case, I will go all the way to maximum on brightness, which is 400%. For dust, I find that it's useful to lower the contrast below 100%. So I'm going to go down to 80%. And then saturation, usually I just leave this one alone at 100, but sometimes it's useful to turn that up or down. By really increasing the brightness, though, we have also revealed artifacts in the survey, right? There are some plane or satellite trails or something going on here, these blue lines, and then there is a red a tiling artifact or a registration artifact here, this thicker blue line that's more vertical over here. So you just have to ignore those. I know it's a little bit annoying to see those artifacts, but it's the best we can do. But by increasing the brightness of the survey, I can now see a lot more. I can see the full tail of this, dusty worm object here. I can see over here this beautiful dust object, sometimes called the Toast Nebula, this little dark one right here. And I'm going to use these things in framing. The first thing I'd like to point out is if I had no control over rotation, I would be pretty limited with this scene, I think, because I would have to make a choice between cutting off a lot of this swoop of the lower part of this dust nebula versus capturing the Toast Nebula here, right? If I have no control over rotation, it's sort of one or the other. I can focus on this one, or I could do something and focus on this one. But neither of these options are very pleasing to me. So I'm very happy that I do have control over rotation, because look what happens if we rotate the camera. If we just rotate the camera slightly, I just went from 0 degrees rotation to 14 degrees rotation. Look at how much that opens up the scene. Now I can get this full extended tail of this nebula going off into this corner, and I can get the full Toast Nebula over here in this corner. And what this does is it really opens up the composition for me, because it creates this very nice diagonal. I'm always looking for interesting diagonals in the scene because it's a great way for your eye to move through a scene, is from one corner of the frame to the other. So in this case, your eye can move from this corner all the way up to this corner on the opposite side. And then what's happening in the rest of the scene? Well, down here in this corner, we have a number of bright stars. And I love having bright stars in the scene to fill in the frame. Now, one thing that we're not seeing here much of is that there's actually a fair amount of HA nebulosity here too. It's just very, very dim. So to better visualize that, something we can do is we can go over here to the survey button and we can change it from DSS colored, the digitized sky survey with the blue and the red plates combined is the colored one, to just the red plates. Okay, and this is very useful in a number of ways. It will allow you to see dimmer HA nebulosity, but also it'll allow you to actually see the structure of the dust more. So once we had sort of an idea for what it looked like in the colored version, I often switch to just the red here. Or if you were going after a blue reflection nebula, maybe you would choose the blue plates, but usually I'm choosing the red. And this allows me to confirm that, yes, this is sort of making this nice X pattern here with the dust and the red streak of nebulosity here. But the other thing that I'm seeing is that there's a nice swoop here with this dust feature, and then there's a nice swoop here that looks like it might be HA. And I now know that this is the supernova remnant behind the dust. It's hard to sort of see that in this visualization, but when I was planning this, I did see how this has a nice curve that is balanced with this curve, and I wanted to make sure that I included both of those curves, and that actually when I was rotating the frame, that those were basically leveled with this line right here, the bottom or top of the frame, depending on how we pick a final rotation for the image. Okay, I've switched to the final image here to continue talking about the composition, but then I'll also sort of critique myself and talk about what went to plan and what maybe could be still improved or didn't go exactly to plan. This ended up being a very deep image. I did 120 hours split across 6 filters. And part of it is that there's interesting things that continued to come out the more I exposed. You know, some of these interesting dust features down here, they really needed a lot of exposure to bring out. And then also the HA and O3 was very dim, but you can see that there's some really cool extended O3 here in the planetary nebula, and then also these streaks in the supernova remnant up here, over here, and a little bit down here. You often don't see those in images of this area. So I was really glad to bring those out as well. Now, one thing that I mentioned that I was really going for was to put this most recognizable feature, the bright reflection nebula, right here in the center. Now, the way I ended up processing it, it's not so much brighter than many other aspects of the image, but I still think that it's probably the most recognizable part of the image. So it gives people who are at least astrophotographers sort of an anchor for what this scene is about. And then I think that the leading lines here of this swoop, this balanced swoop on this side, and then, or if you're moving from the top, it also comes down like this, forming sort of an X into this central region right here. I think that all works really well. And then once you get to this central region, there's another major feature right there that can bring you to this corner of the image where there's a lot more interesting stuff going on. There's this cool little reflection nebula right here. There's this cool dark nebula called the Toast Nebula sometimes, because it looks sort of like a burnt piece of toast. And then there's these cool streaks of the supernova remnant, red behind the Toast Nebula, and then the O3 blue right above it. So I think all of that works really well. What I think is I struggled with compositionally is, since it's a deep exposure, 120 hours, how much to bring out, which really fills out the frame with dust and detail, versus how much to maybe let the bright parts speak a bit more, which might be compositionally better, because as it is, it's a very busy image. I did a pretty glowy star field. I brought out all this dust. There's the supernova remnant. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But I guess my tendency with compositions is I'd prefer a frame that is full of interesting detail than one that has a lot of empty space. Other things that I think work about this image, I think that you need some parts of the image to be a little bit more boring. And I think that my favorite part of an image to be more boring is usually this top left-hand corner. And I know that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because as we're trained visually to start reading anything, whether it's a page in a book or an image, from the top left-hand corner to the right. But I think what works about that is that it's something to do with flow, where you're never just going to look in this top corner and then stop. But if you do start in this top corner, does this image flow? Yes, I think it does, because I think we flow like this. We flow to this part of the image, which I think works really, really well. And then we flow back down here and like this. So I think that it still reads correctly like this. This is sort of another way to read the image, sort of as a Z like this, rather than the X I showed before. So I guess the last question is there anything I would do differently? And, I might do a different interpretation of this, where I don't bring out the supernova remnant as much. I think it might be an interesting image just focusing more on the dust and the natural colors, because this is an LRGB mixed with HA and O3, right? So there's a lot of different filter responses going on. It's sort of a maximalist take on the area. And I think I would be interested in also showing different representations. So that's one idea I have for a book, is basically if you capture a scene with many different filters, showing all the different ways that you can present it. I could also present this scene in pure narrowband, an HOO look, and that would look very different as well. So this is getting a little bit off of composition, but it's interesting how the choices that you make with filters and what to show really changes how a composition works and how a composition reads, right? Because, for instance, this strong red line right here, that wouldn't be such a central feature if I hadn't captured so much HA data. Or this planetary nebula right here. If you look at this image when it's captured in just broadband light, that planetary nebula doesn't pop out so bright. It's actually brighter in this image than what I thought was the main feature, which is this reflection nebula right here. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I use Squarespace at my personal website, nicocarver.com, because it makes it easy to create and maintain a great looking online portfolio of my astrophotography with their guided design system called Squarespace Blueprint. And there are many professional templates for, any kind of website that you want to create. These are all these templates are built in to Squarespace, and then you can customize them to your taste quite easily, as I'm showing here. Beyond design, which is definitely a strength of Squarespace, there are many other features built in. For example, if you want to sell products or prints of your work, or maybe services like astrophotography tutorials or consulting, you can set up an online store. And Squarespace now has flexible payments, including Stripe, PayPal, Apple Pay, credit cards, Afterpay, and ClearPay, so that your customers can pay however works best for them. So whatever kind of website you're looking to make, I'm sure that Squarespace has you covered. And right now you can get a free trial by heading to squarespace.com/nebulaphotos. And when you're ready to make a purchase of hosting or a domain, you can get 10% off with code nebulaphotos at checkout. Till next time, this has been Nico Carver. Clear skies.